Hello and welcome to this Angular series where we will be building a simple e-commerce application using Angular 11/12, HTML, CSS and TypeScript. To begin, what exactly is Angular? And by definition, Angular is a platform and a framework for building single-page client applications using HTML and TypeScript. Angular, as you may be aware, is developed by a team at Google. Now, coming to each of these highlighted terms, most of you would be familiar with HTML. It's hypertext markup language that is used to create web pages. When we talk about TypeScript, TypeScript is a language that was developed by Microsoft as a superset of JavaScript. And it's worth mentioning here that TypeScript cannot run on its own. It needs to be transpiled into JavaScript. Also, Angular itself is based on TypeScript. Coming to single-page client applications, and this poses a question, what is a single-page application? To understand that, first let's take a look at how a multi-page application or a traditional application works. So here on the right we have the client, and the client could be any device you as a user would be working on. So it could be a tablet, desktop, laptop, etc. Right? And then of course the client would have a connection to a remote server, right? Think internet connection, Wi-Fi, etc. Now let's say you as a user want to visit Amazon.com. So what do? You load your browser, which could be Chrome, Firefox, Edge, etc. You type in the search bar Amazon.com and you press enter. What's happening behind the scenes now is that an initial request is generated in your client browser. That initial request is transmitted to the server. The server responds by generating the application homepage. In this case, the application is Amazon. And that application homepage is then sent to your client browser with its HTML, its CSS for styling, and its script, which is JavaScript. Now that you have Amazon's home page residing in your browser, you as a user can interact with Amazon. So you may choose to go to a particular category, for example, luggage, computers, music, etc. When you select a particular category, what happens behind the scenes is another request is generated in your client browser. Let's call that the subsequent request. That request goes to the server. The server responds by generating an entirely new web page with its own HTML, with its own CSS, with its own JavaScript, and then sends that back to your client browser. So to sum up, with a multi-page application, for every interaction that you as a user have with the application, the server responds by generating an entirely new web page with its own HTML, with its own styling, and with its own script, and sends that back to your client browser. Now let's look at how a single page application works. So again, here we have the client, and we know now the client is any device you're working on. And of course, that client would have a connection to a remote server. Now let's say you as a user want to visit youtube.com. So what do? Again, you load your browser, you type in the search bar youtube.com. Press enter. What happens behind the scenes is an initial request is generated in your client browser, which goes to the server. But because YouTube is a single page application, the server responds by sending the entire application, which then resides in your client browser. Now you as a user interact with YouTube. You want to visit a particular channel, you want to listen to a particular music artist, right? Something like that. When you make your selection, what happens? Behind the scenes, again, another request is generated in your client browser. Let's call that the change request. That request is transmitted to the server. The server responds by just sending back the change requested. And this change requested is data in JSON format. JSON, the full form being JavaScript object notation. If you're not familiar with JSON data and the format, we will be working with it in the series. Right, so to sum up with a single page application then, apart from the initial request where we know the entire application is sent back by the server, for every interaction that the user has with the application, the server responds by sending back data in JSON format. Right? Now, obviously, there are some advantages to a single page application, and let's look at some of those. A faster and improved user experience is one. Now, we know that with the initial request, the server sends back the entire application, right? This includes all the HTML, all the CSS, and the scripts required to run that application. We also know that with every interaction after the initial request that you as a user have with the application, a change request is generated in your client browser that goes to the server, but we know that the server responds by sending back only the change requested, which, as I said earlier, is data in JSON format. And because the server is not required to generate a new web page for every interaction the user has with the application, the user is definitely going to have a faster experience, a smoother experience, and an improved experience as well. The next advantage is the savings on server resources. And here we're specifically talking about bandwidth. Now, if you're not familiar with what bandwidth is the maximum amount of data that can be transferred or transmitted to and from a server, right? And every server would have a different capacity with relation to bandwidth. Bandwidth, by the way, is measured in bits per second. If you're wondering what bits are, is something like that, a combination of ones and zeros. And this is what is called machine language. It's the only language that computers understand. It is also the basis on which computers execute code. So when we type in code, after we are done with typing in our entire program, that program goes through a process called the compilation process, wherein the code we type in is translated or compiled into machine language, right? And using that machine language, the computer can then execute that code. Now that we've understood what is bandwidth and what are bits, let's look at a scenario and let's talk about the traditional application first. So here we have a server with many users connected to that server. Each of these users would be accessing the application at the same time. And if we talk about Amazon, you can understand that at any given point in time, there would be millions of users accessing Amazon, right? We know from our previous slides that for every interaction that each of these users has with the traditional application, or Amazon for that matter, the server needs to generate an entirely new web page with its own HTML, with its own CSS, with its own scripts, and send that back to each of these users. Also keep in mind that each one of these users would not be accessing the same web page, right? They would probably be accessing different categories at the same point in time. This, of course, is going to then lead to a heavier load on the server and is going to eat into the server's bandwidth. Now, if we take the same scenario and look at it from a single page application point of view, again, we have millions of users accessing the application, right? And especially if we consider YouTube, then of course there would be millions of users accessing YouTube at any given point in time. But we know that for every interaction that each of these users has with YouTube, barring that initial request, we know that the server has to respond by just sending data in JSON format. Obviously, then this is going to be a lighter load on the server, and the amount of bandwidth consumed is also going to be less. Coming to the next advantage, and that's easier debugging. And as we have seen that a single page application resides in its entirety in the browser. And so developers can use, for example, Chrome developer tools, right, to debug the application. It's worth mentioning here that every platform that allows for single page application development, like React, Vue, Ember, etc., they have their own set of tools that developers can use with Chrome to debug the application. Also, Angular has just released their own set of tools that developers can use to debug their applications. Coming to the multi-page application, a lot of the code for a multi-page application resides on the server side. And as is mentioned here, there's a tight coupling between client-side and server-side code. What that means is that there are dependencies or links between the client-side code and the server-side code, and therefore debugging would mostly require access to the server and therefore is more difficult. Now what we are going to do is we are going to go into Chrome, take a look at Chrome developer tools, as well as recap what we've learned so far. So I'm going to go to amazon.com, and remember now when I press enter, an initial request is going to be generated in my client browser. It's going to go to the server, and the server will respond by sending me the Amazon homepage. Now that I as a user have the Amazon homepage in my browser, I can interact with Amazon. Let's say I want to look at the books category, and within that look for books from the fiction subcategory. The moment I select fiction, what will happen is another request is generated in my client browser that is sent to the server, and the server will respond by sending me an entirely new web page with its own HTML, with its own CSS, and with its own scripts. So if we try that again, let's look at luggage, for example. Look at the styling for books before we go there. So now if I type in DLC, for example, and press enter, remember this is now a new request going from my browser or generated in my browser and being sent or transmitted to the server. And the server responds by sending me an entirely new web page with its own HTML, CSS, and scripting. Okay. Now, before we go to Chrome Developer Tools, there's one more thing we need to see. We need to see how YouTube works. So now let's go to YouTube. And again, remember, when I press enter, an initial request is going to be generated in my client browser. It's going to go to the YouTube server, and the server is going to respond by sending me the entire YouTube application. Now I can interact with YouTube. Let's say I look for a singer, Ed Sheeran. And of course I get back the information I need. But let's do this now. Let's look for a channel. And you will see that the format or the styling of the page will be the same. Right? So this shows us that this is a single page application. And of course, Amazon is a multi-page application. Now, let's go back to the Amazon homepage and let's look at Chrome Developer Tools. Two ways to access Chrome Developer Tools. One is you right-click on the page, click Inspect. The other method is you click on these three little dots here, you click on More Tools, and then you select Developer Tools. Okay. So now we have these tabs. Let's start with the first one. And that's the Elements tab. And the Elements tab, as you can see, features on the left all the HTML for this page, and on the right all the CSS or styling for this page. Okay. What is the Elements tab used for? It's used by developers to mainly change the styling, but we can also do something like this. Right click on a particular element. It's also referred to as a node. And here I'd like to mention that all these elements or nodes are part of what is called the document object model or the DOM. Okay, and the DOM is basically our screen here, right? So the web page. Now, like I said, I can right click on this particular node. I can click inspect and I will be taken straight to that element or that node. I can click on these three little dots, select edit as HTML, and I can choose to change this. So maybe I want to change it to Dubai, and you will see now that this is changed. What is important to remember here is that we are not changing the Amazon application as a whole. We are just changing the current session of Amazon that is running in our browser, right? How do we know that? If we start a new tab and we go to Amazon again, you will see now that it still says here deliver to United Arab Emirates, whereas in this session it says deliver to Dubai, right? I can also click on this node, not click, actually right click, because if I click I will go to that particular link, but if I right click on it, click inspect, and I will be taken straight to that node. I can click these three little dots, select edit as HTML, and then I can choose to change this text. For example, I just wanted to read service, or I wanted to read service to our customers, right? So that's what will appear there. Okay, so after the session, you can probably drill down into these. You can look at these different tags. This is an anchor tag. An anchor tag means if I click on it, it will go to a particular link. Okay, so we'll look at these tags more closely once we get down to coding. Let's move on to the next tab. It's the console tab. And the console tab will show up any errors or warnings that arise out of the application. We will be using the console a lot to monitor how our code is being executed, and we learn about it more when we do. Now coming to the performance tab, and the performance tab can be used by developers to evaluate the runtime performance of this page or the application. And what can be done here is we can click the record button to record this particular run of a session. We can interact with the application a bit, and then we can choose to stop this recording, and results will be generated based on certain metrics. And of course then developers can use these metrics to improve and optimize the performance of this page or the application. Now let's go to the network tab, and I want you to observe what happens here, right? When I refresh this page, and you can see here all the requests and all the responses that are returned. Okay. If I now change the category, let's say I go to let's go to computers, and let's oops, sorry. If I go to computers and I select laptops, right? Let's select laptop gamer and observe again what happens down in that pane. You will see this is refreshed and there's new requests going to the server as well as new responses that are returned. Let's try that again. So now if I go to, let's pick a category, let's say automotive, and let's say auto accessories, right? Now again, watch the pane below there, and I press enter. Again, you will see there's new requests that go and new responses that are returned, right? Also observe how the styling is very different, right? So this tells us that Amazon is a multi-page application. The other interesting thing that we can do with the network tab is we can enable screenshots here, capture screenshots that is, and then if we follow this command, press Ctrl and R, we will get the screenshots, right? And we can see how this page was rendered. So we can double click on this, and then as we move forward, we can see different elements that will appear on the page. And of course, it tells us how long the page took to load. So this page took 3 seconds to load. Right? So in essence, the network tab is used by developers to inspect and monitor network activity. Right? The next tab is the memory tab. And this tab is used by developers to observe how memory is being used by the application, the distribution of memory among different parts of the application. So if there are any issues to be addressed, then those can be dealt with. Coming to the application tab, and as you can see here, you have local storage, you have session storage, you have IndexedDB, web SQL, etc. I'm not going to go into those details because that's actually beyond the scope of what we are doing. But what we can look at are cookies, and you can see here we have especially the information with regard to when cookies expire, and we can actually delete these cookies. Okay. We can do the same with YouTube, right? You can go ahead and delete the cookies. Coming to the security tab, and this tab will allow developers to see how secure the web page or the web application is. And you can actually click on View Certificate, and you will get details like who issued the certificate, to whom, right? Under details, you get the same. You will also get details as to when the certificate is valid from and when it is valid till. Okay. Coming to the sources tab, the sources tab is divided into 3 panes. The leftmost pane shows us all the resources that have been loaded by this page. The middle pane is the editor, right, where we can see the code. And then on the right hand side, we have certain tools that developers can use for debugging. Now what I will do is let me go back to the home page, right, and we can now see this particular file, right? This is our index.html file, and here you can see this is all HTML, right? And down here, what we see is JavaScript. Okay, so you can see here it says script type equal to JavaScript, and then you have these lines of code. Okay, so on the right hand side, what we can do is we can move down, select mouse, then select the click event. Now if I click anywhere on the page, I will see the message pause in debugger. And we can also see the line of code at which execution is paused. And then of course we can choose to step through the code one instruction at a time. Okay, so this is very useful to developers for debugging. Right, coming to the last tab, that's the Lighthouse tab, and that tab can be used by developers to generate a report. So if we click here, Chrome Developer Tools is generating a report based on certain parameters, and of course the page will get scores again based on those parameters, and then developers can use those scores to improve the application in these different areas. Okay, so that's a brief overview of Chrome Developer Tools. Coming back to our slides, what are examples of single-page applications and multi-page applications? We have YouTube, Spotify, Google Maps, Airbnb, all single-page applications. And then we have Amazon and eBay, multi-page applications. Now, one may ask, how do we decide whether to use a single-page application model or a multi-page application model? And that would depend on what we are building. So if we're building an application that has got categories and subcategories like Amazon does, then we would do well to go with a multi-page application. On the other hand, if we're building something like Google Maps, Airbnb, YouTube, etc., we can go with a single page application. But having said that, we are going to be using Angular to create a simple e-commerce application, like I said in the beginning. And of course, our e-commerce application is not as complicated as Amazon's is, because we don't really have categories within our application. Coming to the disadvantages of single page applications, and the first one is to do with cross-site scripting. So single page applications are susceptible to cross-site scripting. What's the meaning of cross-site scripting? It means that an attacker can put in or inject malicious code into your application, and that code could then steal user data, for example. Now, having said that, Angular does have measures in place that developers should adopt in order to mitigate the risk of cross-site scripting. The second one is to do with search engine optimization. Now, what is the meaning of search engine optimization? It is the process by which developers can have their application made easier to find or more visible to a search engine, for example, Google. Right now, search engine optimization is a little more difficult to do with a single page application. Why? Because with a multi-page application, remember there are several web pages, and each of those would have their own URL or universal resource locator. Right? Again, there are methods though that can be used by developers to optimize their application so that they are easier to find via a search engine like Google. Right, coming to the Angular architecture, and the Angular framework is modular in structure. Each of those modules will be referred to as ng modules, and of course each ng module could then be comprised of components as well as services. And of course we'll be taking a closer look at modules, components and services when we get down to coding. Coming to an Angular project, every Angular project, when it is created, will have by default a root module and a root component. This is given to us by Angular. And the root module, as you can see here, would be referred to as the app module. The root component would be referred to as the app component. Developers can then add components, services, and modules as their application requires. Coming to our own application that we are going to create, we're going to work with the app module, and within that we're going to have 7 different components. As you can see here, these three on the right would be the core of our e-commerce application. The ones on the left are more about the company itself. What are we doing now? Today, we need to download node.js. So let's get to that quickly because that's going to take some time. And to do that, we need to just go into our browser and just type in node.js download. Click on the official link and you will see you have Windows as well as Mac installer. So choose what's relevant to your device. Okay, we have 32-bit and 64-bit as well, right? For Windows, that is. And if you're not sure whether your your machine or your device is a 32-bit configuration or a 64-bit, just type in the search bar system information, open the app, and then you would see system type here. And here you can see it says x64, right? So we can actually then download the x64-bit. If it says 32, then download the 32-bit. Okay. Accept all the prompts, right? What I was going to tell you was that Node.js download would result in also downloading Python and Chocolatey as well. So just allow for those to download as well. And once that is done, we can then proceed to install Angular. Right? To install Angular, we will be using something called npm or Node Package Manager, which is automatically downloaded with Node.js. Okay. Then we will create our application using the ng-new command, and we will add components using the ng-generate component command. These are both Angular commands. And then we will look at the structure of a component, what a component actually looks on the inside. We will proceed to add functionality to our app component, and finally we will talk about routing. To give you a brief idea of what routing actually is about, as you can see here, we will have 7 different components, but we need a way by which the user will be able to navigate between these components, and that's why we would require routing. Okay, right. I hope Node.js has been downloaded by now. If not, you can pause the video at this point, wait for it to download because you will need to use it from the next slide onwards. Okay, if it's already downloaded, then all we need to do is go into our Windows search bar and type in node.js command prompt, and we're looking for the command prompt and not the Node.js application itself. Click on open and you would have this screen. Okay, as you can see, it says here your environment has been set up for using Node.js, and that's the version, and npm, which is Node Package Manager. We're going to now use npm to install Angular. So just type in this command npm install -g, which stands for global, meaning that we would be able to access Angular from any directory on our computer. @Angular /CLI standing for command line interface. And the command line interface is what allows us to create our application, create components, create or generate components, I should say, create or generate modules, also compile the application. So it's a very important part of Angular. Press enter and Angular will be installed. The next thing is to use the ng-new command then to create our application and use a name that's meaningful to what we're doing, right? We're creating a simple e-commerce application, so you can type in e-com app or e-store or anything like that, right? Which gives you an idea of what the application is doing. Press enter, and then Angular will ask, would you like to add Angular routing? For this project, type in no, Why? Because we're going to actually learn the command to add routing to our application for this project. For future projects, you can always type in a Y for yes at this point, and Angular will automatically add routing to your application. Of course, it is to be said here that some applications will not require routing, right? For example, you don't have so many components, right? You're just doing a trial project or something like that, where you just have, the app component and nothing else. Okay, so in that case, you wouldn't require routing. The next screen would be, would you like to, which style sheet format would you like to use? Okay. And as you can see, CSS has been highlighted. We will be using CSS, so just press enter at this point. No changes required. And Angular will start installing all packages required for the application. And you can see down this list, it's installed the root module, which is called the app module, and the app component as well. And you can see that the app component has 4 different files. This is the HTML file, or what is called the view file. It's also called the template file. And then we have the testing file, which is not used during development. This is used only when you're ready to go live on the internet, or I should say when our application is ready to go live, or in technical jargon, when the application is ready to go into the production environment. Then we have the TypeScript file, which will house the logic for this component. And then we have the CSS file, which will be used to style all the elements in our view file or the HTML file. Okay. Then you will see the message packages installed successfully, right? This is to do with GitHub. Okay. The next step is to change directory. So CD and space after that, along with the name of your application. Press enter and you will see a prompt like this, right? Just type in ngserve at that point, and ngserve will actually end up compiling this application as is. It doesn't mean we are done with our e-commerce application. This is the default application, like I mentioned earlier, which is created by Angular, and this is done for every new Angular application that you create. The practice of compiling that application as is to make sure that all packages have been installed successfully. So after you've typed in ngserve, press enter, and then you would be asked, would you like to share anonymous usage data? You can agree or disagree. There's no compulsion here. And then Angular will proceed to compile the application. Once compilation is done, you will see a message compiled successfully, and a message saying that the server is listening on localhost 4200. Open your browser on localhost 4200. And that's exactly what we'll do. You can go into your browser, right, and just type in localhost 4200, press enter, and this is what you should see. You will see that Angular has included the name of your application here on screen. Right, so now all our packages have been installed successfully. We can now proceed to add in our code, but we need to decide which IDE or integrated development environment we are going to use. I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code. If you want to use that as well, all you need to do is go into your browser and just type in Visual Studio Code download, and then click on the link. And as you can see, you have for Windows the 64-bit version as well as the 32-bit version and the ARM version as well. I would suggest go with system installer and then choose whichever version you need, right? For Mac users, you can use your Mac version, right? Once you select the version, right, Visual Studio Code will of course serve this screen to you. Accept the agreement, right? Of course, it's after you allow the application to make changes on your hard disk. That is, in the next screen, you will see these options. Select all of them, right? Because we need all of them for Visual Studio Code to run correctly. And then click Next. And that will basically start the installation of Visual Studio Code. And once it's installed, it will actually open up. Close that window. I'm going to show you how to get into Visual Studio Code from our Node.js command prompt. Now you would already be at your Node.js command prompt. I'm not, so I'm just going to go there and change directory to my project. Oh, sorry, it's not the name. Right, so now we just type in code space dot, but you would still have your server running, right? So just press Ctrl and C, right? You will see a message saying, do you wish to terminate batch job, right? Just type in Y for yes, and that would terminate the server. Okay, you'll be back at your prompt, right? And at that point, just type in code space dot. You press enter, and once you press enter, you will see the same screen, right? If we click on SRC, you should see the different folders and different files as well, right? If you click on app, you will see the contents of the app component. Okay, so as you can see, we have the CSS file, HTML file. If you click on the HTML file, this is what you should see, right? We then got the testing file and the TypeScript file. Note also we have the root module or the app module, which we'll come to later. Currently focusing on the HTML file. We need to delete all this code. So basically just select all of it, backspace, and that will erase all the code. We are done. Once this code is deleted, we can now proceed to create or generate our components. To do that, we need to go back to our Node.js command prompt. And I'm going to now just start up this project so that we can see all the components that we need. Right. Let's position this screen next to the list of components. So these are all the components. We only need 7 of these, right? I will tell you which ones. So just type in ng generate component and the name of the first one, about. And when you press enter, that will create the component. This is a pretty short process. So once the component is created, press the up arrow on your keyboard. You will be shown the same command again, right? Backspace on about and then type in cart. Press enter and you'll have the cart component created. Okay. Once the cart component is created, again press the up arrow on your keyboard. You will, be served the previous command, that is ng generate component cart, backspace cart, and type in checkout. Press enter and you'll have your checkout component created. Right. Now there's a shorter way of doing this. Just type in ng space g for generate, c for component, and the next one is contact. So just type in contact, press enter, and your contact component is created. After the contact component is created, press the up arrow on your keyboard. You should see the same command, backspace on contact, and we don't need logout. Let's take mission. Okay, press enter and the mission component is created. Again, press the up arrow on your keyboard. You will see the same command, backspace on mission, and now type in store. Right, store. Press enter and the store component will be created. And then we have our last component. So press the up arrow on your keyboard, backspace on store, and type in T. Press enter and your team component will be created. So now you will see you would have 7 different components here, right? Great. So now that our components are created, what do they look like? And I'm going to go into one I haven't used, okay, because the others there is code in them. So the CSS file will be blank. For you, I think basically you'll have your components blank because we haven't put in any code, right? So that's fine. CSS file is blank. The HTML file will just have a p tag which says the name of your component and the word works, right? This is automatically done by Angular for every component. And then we have the testing file which does have some code in it. Okay, this is again automatically put in by Angular. And then we have the TypeScript file. Okay, so the TypeScript file here, as you can see, there's the component decorator, right? And it's basically telling Angular this is a component, right? And then we are saying export this component so that it's available to the entire application. And we'll get into more details with this component as we go along. One important thing I will mention is that the selector can be used as a tag in our HTML file. And we'll see how we use that in later sessions. Right? We'll also, for people who don't know HTML, and if you don't know what I'm talking about in terms of tags, we'll come to that in a minute. Right, now we've seen the contents of the component, what the component looks like, right? We can now proceed to add a little functionality. So come to your app component HTML file, and all we need to type in is this first line. And this is our H1 tag, which is going to give us a heading of a kind of a big font because this is going to be for the name of our store. And then you can put in your name of the name you have for your store. If it's a clothing store, a sports goods store, a music store, anything like that, put in an appropriate name. Then we have an image tag, and you can see the image tag is embedded within the heading tag, so it's going to appear on the same row on screen basically, right? And then we have the source for the image, and as you can see here, I have assets mentioned, and you can type this in actually. You can type in H1 tag, then put in a name for your store, type in the image tag, src equal to assets. Now where is assets? If you look to the left of your screen, if you come down that list, you will see an assets folder. This folder is automatically again given to us by Angular when we create our application. Now within that, we're going to create an images folder. Why? Because not only do we need an image for our logo, but we would also need images for all the items in the store, right? And we're going to store all of them in one place, right? Just to be a bit organized in terms of our application. Okay, so to create that folder, just right click on assets, click new folder, and then type in images. As you can see, I get a message saying it already exists because I've already created it earlier. Just press enter after this and the images folder will be created. Once the images folder is created, we now need to look for a logo. Right? To do that, again, let's go to our browser. Okay, and I was looking for a muffin. You can look for any image that you would like to use as a logo. Okay. Right, so once I have the screen, you can see basically Google gives us all search results. We're going to click on images. And here's an important point. We need to click on tools and usage rights. You can see, basically Google is giving us all results. We don't want to use commercial and other licenses because these are images that have been licensed already, right? We don't want to steal those. We don't want any legal trouble. Let's choose Creative Commons. Right, so now you will see the word licensable. You can pick from the themes up as well. Right, so pick an image that appeals to you. Okay, and after you've picked the image, right, just right click on it and choose save image. So click on save image, and now we need to save it, remember, in that images folder we just created. To get to the images folder, click on C drive and then click on users. Okay, then click on your username and then come down the list and you should see your project name or your application name. Then click on the source folder, SRC that is. Click on the assets folder and then the images folder. Before you save the file, remember to change the primary name. What's the primary name? The name before the dot. Don't change the secondary name. That's the format of the file. Okay, so change it to something meaningful. For example, it's the picture of a muffin, so we'll just name it muffin. Choose save and your image is saved. Now it's telling me that muffin already exists. Do I want to replace it? Maybe not, so I'm going to click no, right? And that does it for our logo. Coming back to our code, we can now put the name of the image here. Okay, now that we put in the HTML, we need to style the elements. What are the elements that we have? The ones in pink. We've got H1 and IMG. Okay, so let's go to our styling file or the CSS file and just copy down the image styling. For those who know CSS, this is a breeze, right? For those who don't know, we just have simple properties here. Maximum width of the image is 30 pixels, maximum height 30 pixels. Border radius allows us to have a circular frame for the image instead of a squarish one. And again, you can play around with this later. You can, change the maximum width. You can take away this border radius, see what happens, change the margin right value, etc., etc. Okay, and then we need to copy the H1 styling. So for that is just a border, basically putting in a border for our headings of 2 pixels, and this is the color. You can change the color later on, especially if you're using Visual Studio Code. It's very easy, right? The codes will just appear there, right, as you change the color. Okay, so we don't need to remember those codes. Text align center will put our text or the name of our store in the center of the screen. Margin bottom 0px for our heading. Background is slate blue. Again, you can change that color, right? And then we have maximum height of 60 pixels. Now again, I suggest change these values, see what happens on screen, right? That's the best way to learn. Okay, once we style the elements, we can now proceed to actually compile this, right, and see what we've achieved so far. So to do that, just type in ngserve and press enter, right, and the compilation should begin. If we have errors, we just deal with them. If we don't have any errors, we can then proceed to our browser and just type in localhost 4200. You see the new compiler version is much better. I don't get all those different prompts. It's compiled successfully. Now let's go into our browser, right, and Let's open a new tab there and type in localhost 4200, press enter, and that's what you see, right, with our little logo, the image you chose, the name of the store, the little 2-pixel border, the slate blue color, etc. Right, so that's done. I hope that's been simple enough for you to understand. The next thing we need to discuss is routing. So coming back to our presentation or our slides, let's look at now our app module.ts. Open that file, and this is what it looks like. Right? We've got here bootstrap app component. What does that mean? It means that it is the app component that will be used by Angular to launch or start up the application. Okay, and that's by default. Okay, right. Now note that we have, in the imports array, we have just browser module, and because that's imported there, this again is done by Angular by default. Okay. Now we need to add routing. Okay, for that we need to put in a command. So ng generate module, and we're actually supposed to put in a name. As you can see, I forgot to put in the name, and that's not a problem because later on Google will ask you, not Google, sorry, Angular will ask you for the name. Okay, so if you're putting in the name now, ng generate module, then put in that name, app routing --flat --module equal to app. Needs to be typed exactly like this. What does it mean? Generate a module called app routing, and we will stick to this name, right? Please don't change this name. It's better to stick with this name, right? And then --flat basically is telling Angular to put this module in my app directory, not to create a separate directory or a separate folder for it. And then --module equal to app, basically telling Angular to update the app module. Okay, right? Once you press enter, right, you will again get that message, and you can agree or disagree. And then you will see it's created the module, and you will see it's updated the app module. Okay, and you can see it's put this module into the app folder. That's because we said --flat. Let's say, I hope that's clear. Okay, now if we actually go into this file, or first let's go into the app module file. Why? Because we can see now that app routing module has been added. It's been imported as well. Okay, that's done by Angular. Okay, now let's go to our app routing module, and this is what it looks like. Okay, we don't need common module, so we can delete this line, right? And then instead of that line, put in this line, import open curly braces, and leave a space just for easy readability. Yes, the Angular does that as well by default. So let's follow that convention. Router module comma routes from Angular / and remember the single quotes, and select router. Okay, the router module. Okay. Right, so now once that is done, right, you will have something like that on screen. The next thing we need to do is create the constant routes, and this is going to be an array, and it has to be exactly like this. And within this array, we're now going to put in some details about our components. So for each component, we have to put in an import statement, And the import statement would include adding the name of the component exactly like this, right? Because we are following convention where we are using what is called camel case. What does camel case mean? Camel case means about is a separate word, component is a separate word, first letter of each word to be in capitals. That's all, right? From, and then open single quotes, the dot meaning the current directory, forward slash, just type in about, and then forward slash about dot component, semicolon. And coming to the routes array, just open curly braces, put in the word path, colon. You can leave a space again, that's inconsequential. Put in the word about, component, colon, and type in a capital A, and you may or may not see a Q saying about component. Most likely you will. Select that, close the curly brace, and you have to put a comma for the next component. Okay, so now I will show it to you in the code, but before that, I would like to show you something else. You can see the squiggly, right? Okay, so basically we need to delete that, right? Okay, once that's deleted, okay, let's basically go and see our code now. So let me go straight to the app routing module. Right. So you've already typed in about component, so leave that as is. You can then type in mission component, right? And I can do that with you just to sort of show you, though I think if you've done the first one, you shouldn't have a problem in any case. So this is what happens. You type in mission. Now I'm getting this queue because I already typed in it earlier, right? So I can then just, select that. This is purely from Visual Studio Code. Okay. From, and then when I type in a dot slash mission, right? So I can select that, forward slash mission dot component. Okay. And put the semicolon after that. Do that for all the 7 components that you have. Don't follow this because this has got additional components. So I would suggest look to the left of your screen, see the components you have, and then import those, and then put in the paths. You see that all of them is followed by a comma, right? Remember the semicolon after the array. Okay. Once we have now set the paths for the different components, we have basically specified the routes. We have to have this put in router module dot for route routes. Now you can see it's using that constant to in one line configure the router module. Okay, and then we are exporting router module within the exports array so that it's available throughout the application. This is of course by default. So this actually finishes the session for today. I hope you've enjoyed the session, right? I'll see you in the next session where we will add more functionality to our app component HTML file. We will also introduce event binding, and we will add more functionality to our other components as well. Till then, take care, stay safe. Bye.